Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. Glad to have you guys in. Today, I'm going to be giving you guys my Week 4 wide receiver rankings. That's right. We are into Week 4 now. I hope things are going well for you so far. If not, though, I got you. I'm going to help you figure out how to value these players this coming week. So I'm going to be giving you my wide receiver rankings. And just to let you know before I get into these, if you're new to my channel, I don't do consensus rankings, okay? I don't just copy everyone else's rankings and put everyone in the same order. I like to give you guys a good idea of where I think these players are actually going to finish on the week. So they might not be quite consensus, but I think they're as accurate as possible. And my goal is to be more accurate than any other content creator so I can help you win your week and help you win your league. So I'm going to start right here with the very first player on my list that I have here. And yeah, it's probably no surprise to a lot of you, Justin Jefferson, up against the Carolina Panthers. This is a very favorable matchup. This Minnesota offense, despite being an 0-3 team, they look like an unstoppable offense. I mean, week in and week out, Kirk Cousins is passing for 300 yards. He's passed for over 300 yards in every game. His connection with Justin Jefferson, his number one wide receiver here, is very, very good. Very good. I mean, the floor, the ceiling, everything is super consistent for this guy. We know that he's going to get somewhere between 11 and 13 targets every single game. He's going to give you those ceiling weeks where he gets over 15 targets. We know that he gets targeted downfield. The average depth of target numbers are very good. He catches passes at all levels of the field, sideline routes, crossing routes, short slants, deep bombs, everything. Justin Jefferson is involved in plays at all levels of the field. The entire offense is designed for him, and he has a very favorable matchup. You're starting in week 1. Next player on my list is going to be Tyreek Hill. Now, I almost wanted to have Tyreek ahead of Justin Jefferson, but I couldn't quite do it. Anyways, Tyreek Hill's going up against a tough Buffalo Bills defense, but I'm pretty certain that this Miami Dolphins offense is matchup proof. Now, every year, there are very few offenses in the NFL that actually fit that category of being matchup proof. But I think the Miami Dolphins are going to be one of them, and I guess that's pretty easy to say when they just came off a 70-point scoring week. But, you know, they're going to have their real first defensive test this week against the Buffalo Bills. I don't think Buffalo is going to be able to stop them. I don't think anyone can stop this offense. There's just too much talent. The play calling is brilliant. There's just too much speed. It's a track and field offense. They have 4 guys on their starting roster that run a sub-4 440. This is going to be an unstoppable offense. Tyreek Hill is the main weapon. This is a potential shootout game against the Buffalo Bills. We could see high scores on both sides of the ball. You want everybody on both these teams in this game. Tyreek Hill's the number 2. Number 3 is going to be Stephon Diggs. He's going to be having to help Buffalo keep up with Miami if Miami is playing with the lead, or helping Buffalo establish a lead because they know that Miami is going to put up points. The wide receivers are going to be heavily involved in this game. I don't care how good either defense is. It doesn't matter to me. Both these offenses are good enough to be matchup proof against most defenses. Now, obviously, the Bills look bad in week 1 against the Jets, but that's week 1. When this offense finds their stride, which it looks like they're doing, they're pretty much unstoppable. Stephon Diggs is a great play this week, but you're starting him regardless. But, you know, he's my number 3. Number 4 is going to be Devontae Adams. This guy's absolutely just fantasy money. The dude had 42 fantasy points this past week. You know, I had some quarrels with him going into the season because I didn't like the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo was throwing him the ball. He's definitely one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL, honestly. I mean, he somehow finds a way to win a pretty good percentage of the time, but he's not a very good NFL quarterback whatsoever. He doesn't have very good arm strength. He's constantly injured. He doesn't have very good mobility in the pocket. So I was thinking, hey, he's going to kind of ruin Devontae Adams, but I forgot how freaking good Devontae Adams is. This dude is quarterback proof. It doesn't matter who's throwing him the ball. He's so good at creating separations in his routes that he always seems to be wide open at any level of the field by like a 5-yard margin. This dude's ability to get open is mind-blowing. He is an absolute must-start every week. Next player on my list is going to be Keenan Allen up against the Vegas Raiders. Keenan Allen against Vegas. Look, Keenan Allen is the wide receiver 2 in fantasy right now. Mike Williams just got hurt, and he was already putting up those kind of crazy numbers. This dude saw 20 targets last week. Obviously, completely unsustainable. He's not going to see 20 targets every week. But to think that this dude is going to get 11 plus 12 targets every single game is very realistic because it's probably the target share he's going to see. We know that this dude is right up there with Devontae Adams and Amari Cooper as far as the best route runners in the league. His ability to get open is absolutely awesome. Las Vegas is not going to have a good enough secondary whatsoever to stop Keenan Allen in this game. The Chargers are going to run all over the Vegas Raiders, and Keenan Allen is going to be the main weapon used in the offense. This dude has crazy target share and extreme talent with one of the best quarterbacks in the league throwing on the ball. You're easily starting him against Vegas. Next player on my list is going to be Jamar Chase. It was good to see Jamar Chase finally come back into form this last week. I think a lot of us were starting to worry because, you know, the Joe Burrow injury and everything like that. And Joe Burrow still really doesn't look like himself. So I have to bump Jamar Chase down in my weekly rankings a little bit, regardless of the matchup. But Against Tennessee, it's kind of hard to run the ball against Tennessee. Mixon really isn't a very efficient yards per carry running back. They're going to need to pass the ball to move the ball in this game, period. And Tennessee's a pretty good defense, but Ja'Marr Chase just has such insane target share on most weeks that I think that he's going to be matchup proof to a pretty good degree. I don't think that Tennessee is going to really hold him back all that much. I mean, I think that they might stop him from having one of those massively high ceiling games and not really letting him get past the defense. But if you look at this last game against the Rams weren't letting Ja'Marr Chase get past him on defense. They weren't allowing the big play, and he still had 11 receptions and 100-plus yards. So the bottom line is he can eat from any level of the field, and it really doesn't matter where he's at. This dude is going to produce awesome fantasy numbers. Next player on my list is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. Guys, Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the safest players in fantasy. This dude had 12 targets last week. The floor-ceiling combination is absolutely insane. He always has a chance to be one of the highest-scoring wide receivers on the week, and he has the floor to pretty much give you a good fantasy performance every single week this season. He's been good in weeks 1, 2, and 3. There's no reason to sit him. Next player on my list is going to be Calvin Ridley. Now, obviously, Calvin Ridley is going to be higher on my rankings than most people have him because he's coming off 2 bust weeks, but I still think he's going to absolutely explode this season. Playing against Atlanta this week, I mean, I don't think Atlanta is going to have an answer for him. I don't think Atlanta is a good football team, okay? I think that the Jags are going to run all over him. Now, obviously, the Jags have looked really bad offensively these past 2 weeks, but it's a long season. You can't really let a 2-week sample deter you from playing a player that has all kinds of talent with a great quarterback throwing in the ball. He's going to be the number 1 wide receiver in this Jags offense, okay? He's playing against a team that really isn't going to have a good enough defense or a good enough secondary to stop him whatsoever. I think that Calvin Ridley has a huge bounce-back game, and you absolutely cannot have him on your bench this week. The ceiling is too freaking high. Next player on my list is going to be A.J. Brown against Washington. Washington does not have a very good defense against the pass. A.J. Brown is pretty much a matchup-proof wide receiver anyway. And this Philadelphia Eagles offense, much like last year, cannot be stopped. No offense or no defense in the league has had an answer for Philadelphia yet. A.J. Brown's one of the main weapons. Easy, automatic start every week. Next player on my list is going to be CeeDee Lamb. Now, CeeDee Lamb was a little bit disappointing this past week, but look, this is an auto must-start player still. He's still in the set-it-and-forget-it category. He's on an offense that still will put up a lot of points this season. Facing up against a pretty tough defense, I think that the Cowboys are going to have to establish the run game in this game to really be a super effective offense. That's the only reason I don't have CeeDee Lamb higher, because this is a guy that I like to have in my top 7 or so pretty much every single week. But against a tough defense and coming off a bad performance from the Dallas Cowboys, I got to rank CeeDee Lamb a little bit lower, but he's still good enough to be in my top 10. And there's really no team that you could possibly have where you sit this guy on the bench. Next player on my list is going to be Amari Cooper up against Baltimore. He finally found his stride this past week with Deshaun Watson. They had a very good connection. It was very good to see that. They are going up against a tough Baltimore defense, though. And if the pass rush gives Deshaun Watson fits, that could be a problem. But let's not forget, even though Baltimore has a pretty nasty defense, and they can definitely get after the quarterback a little bit, the Browns have a very good offensive line, one of the best offensive line in the NFL, best offensive lines in the entire NFL. So they should be able to keep Deshaun Watson out of trouble, give him time to pass in this game. His arm accuracy was looking a lot better in this last game. It was a very encouraging sign, and we know that he gives you a little bit of that rushing upside as well. So that's going to help the overall efficiency of the offense, and I think Amari Cooper is going to have another explosion game. We're going to go back-to-back weeks with Amari Cooper putting up a huge fantasy performance. Next player on my list is going to be Mike Evans. I'm just going to go ahead and put him higher in rankings where he belongs, right? People are still hesitant to rank him higher. Look, we've seen it in weeks 1, 2, and 3. This dude has a nose for the end zone. They target him heavily within the red zone. He catches passes at all levels of the field. He's one of the best deep threats in the league. He has a very good connection with Baker Mayfield. I don't care if he's going up against the plus a tough defense this week. I am starting Mike Evans no matter what. This guy is not going to be on my bench for quite some time unless he really just seriously starts to underperform, which I don't see happening because he's getting crazy target share in his offense. And we know how good this dude is. Mike Evans is a must-start every week, even against a tough New Orleans defense. It's got to be in your lineup. Next player on my list is going to be Jalen Waddle against Buffalo. Now, I don't understand why Jalen Waddle is so low in so many people's rankings. His offense just put up 70 points, okay? This is a very, very good offense. Jalen Waddle is still the number 2 weapon in the offense. It goes Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, then the running backs. I know the running backs are coming off a great week, and I still think that those running backs are going to give you a lot of those really good performances this year. But Jalen Waddle is still the number 2 weapon in this offense. Going up against Buffalo, an inevitable shootout-style game, how could you have Jalen Waddle on your bench? Now, obviously, he's got to come back from the concussion and pass the protocol and everything like that. And if he doesn't do that, obviously you don't play him. But if he's in the lineup, if he is set to actually play, you have to start Jalen Waddle. Next player on my list is going to be Michael Pittman Jr. This dude's seen 10-plus targets every single game this year so far. And so I just don't see any team where you possibly have Michael Pittman Jr. on your bench. Next player on my list is going to be Deebo Samuel up against Arizona. Look, Deebo Samuel's been pretty good recently. I mean, obviously, Brandon Ayuk has already missed some time this year, and Deebo Samuel has benefited from that, but he's got a very good connection with Brock Purdy. The 49ers finally have a quarterback that can pass the ball consistently, has good arm accuracy. I think this is very good for Deebo Samuel. I wasn't that big on Deebo going into the season, but I think I'm starting to like him a little bit more, and I certainly like him against Arizona, a team who, despite coming off a good matchup against the Cowboys, really does not have a very good defense at all. Deebo Samuel should be able to run all over these boys. Next player on my list is going to be DK Metcalf against the Giants. DK Metcalf is part of an offense that's definitely been better in weeks 2 and 3. They had a terrible week 1. Weeks 2 and 3, they were a little bit better. DK Metcalf is still the clear-cut wide receiver 1 in this offense up against the Giants team that doesn't really have a very good defense against the pass. I love DK Metcalf to explode this week. Next player on my list is going to be Puka Nacua. Now, this guy has been very, very good so far. Not quite as good last night as he was in the first 2 games, but he's clearly got talent. If you're watching these games, this is a very good wide receiver. He's a good route runner. He's big, powerful, strong, fast. He's a good player, right? So as long as there's no Cooper Kupp in the lineup, I am starting Puka Nacua every single week. Up against the Indianapolis Colts, good enough matchup. Puka is pretty much always going to be in my starting lineup. He's pretty much a mid-range wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 2 at this point. Next player on my list is going to be Devontae Smith up against Washington. Again, this matchup doesn't scare me whatsoever. Washington is not going to be able to stop Philadelphia. And while I still think that A.J. Brown will probably have the bigger game, Devontae Smith still has to be in my top 25. And in most cases, almost all cases, he's going to be in my starting lineup, at worst as a flex option, but a lot of times as my wide receiver too. Next player on my list is going to be T. Higgins up against Tennessee. The second half of this last game, the Bengals started to show some life. This is an encouraging sign, but T. Higgins has been inconsistent this year. He had that one really good game, and this is a tough defense. So this is the point in my rankings where I start to get a little bit more conservative, and I say that you don't necessarily have to have this guy in your lineup. The first 19 players I mentioned, I think you've got to have him in your lineup. T. Higgins, well, he can be in your lineup, but you might have a better option, right? So, yes, he's a very viable starting option for a low-end wide receiver 2 or a flex, but you can consider other options, definitely. Next player on my list is going to be George Pickens up against the Houston Texans. George Pickens has really started to step things up. He's clearly Kenny Pickett's number 1 target. The average step to target is very, very good. He's great at making plays downfield, gives you a very high weekly ceiling because of this. We saw that in week 2. But the floor is still a little bit low, unfortunately, for George Pickens because he still isn't consistently gathering 10 targets a game. I want to see him start to consistently gather at least 9 targets a game before I put him too high in my rankings. But if you're looking for a good flex option or a low-end wide receiver 2, George Pickens definitely can get you some points in your starting lineup. Next player on my list is going to be Christian Kirk against the Atlanta Falcons. Look, Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk have had a pretty good connection so far, all right? In fact, Christian Kirk has done more recently than Calvin Ridley. I still have Calvin Ridley well ahead of him, as far as where they finished on the season. But, against Atlanta, I don't think Atlanta's going to be able to stop Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville's finally going to have that bounce-back game where their offense actually shows some life, right? I think it's highly unlikely that a high-powered offense like this is bad 3 weeks in a row. If they are, we might start to knock these players down a little bit in our rankings. But for now, I'm still very high on both the Jacksonville wide receivers, and Christian Kirk is a very viable starting option. Next player on my list is going to be Nico Collins. Now, obviously, he only had 3 targets this past game, but he had 20 targets in the first 2 games. I still think he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver in this offense. Obviously, Tank Dell is coming off a very big game, but he only had 5 targets. So, he had to make one really big play to make his fantasy day, which is great. It shows that he has big playability and that they're not afraid to target him downfield, and that's good and everything. But that kind of stuff isn't going to sustain production every single week. I still think that Nico Collins will gather more targets than anyone on this team. He's got the best combination of size and speed. He's a veteran, more experienced than Tank Dell. I still think that he is going to be the higher scoring fantasy wide receiver than Tank Dell. So this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm starting Nico Collins with confidence. Next player on my list is going to be Tyler Lockett against the Giants. He's the number 2 behind DK Metcalf. I like Tyler Lockett, right? I think that, the problem is like his ceiling is a little bit capped, right? That's why he's never going to be a wide receiver 1 for me. He's really more of a flex than a wide receiver 2 option, but he is good enough to be in your starting lineup because he is a very talented wide receiver who has the ability to make big plays and he's playing in an offense that's looked a lot better the last 2 weeks. I think he's just good enough to be in your starting lineup at your flex. Next and final player on my list is going to be Jakobi Meyers. Now, Jakobi Meyers had a very good week 1, dealt with an injury in week 2, but he's looked pretty good so far. He's clearly the number 2 target after Devontae Adams. They don't even really look for Hunter Renfrow. They haven't been passing Josh Jacobs the ball all that much out of the backfield. Jakobi Meyers is by far and away the next best target on this team besides Devontae Adams. And with all the attention being on Devontae Adams, you got to figure that Jakobi Meyers is going to see some extra looks, even though Devontae Adams can get open no matter what you do. Jakobi Meyers is going to see a good target share in this offense. We saw it in week 1. This is a guy who could put up some pretty decent fantasy points for you this season. I like him in this game because they're probably going to be playing from behind against the Chargers. So more passing volume for Devontae Adams than Jakobi Meyers. So I think he's a good play this week. Next. Actually, no, that's it. Those are my top 25. All right, guys. I appreciate you tuning in for my rankings. Hope these rankings help. Appreciate it. Catch you later.